educators at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. Today, we're going to be learning some really interesting stuff. I just want to say beforehand, though, that some of the things we'll be looking at today and some of the things we'll be discussing involve remains of animals. If this is something that you might find disturbing, I would recommend that perhaps you either tune in later, not necessarily at a live date, or just be aware that we will be dealing with remains in this program today. But don't be intimidated. It's going to be really interesting. I can tell you that right off the bat, because today it is my sincere pleasure to introduce our expert to you. Andie Carrillo is one of our zoology preparators at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and she works in the dermestarium, which is a really, really cool place. And she is going to be sharing what she does with us here today. So Andie, please take it away.
Yeah, thanks for that intro. As I said, yep, I am the zoology preparator here at the museum. My job is to dissect, keep skins, keep skeletons, preserve parasites, a lot of different parts of animals and all kinds of animals, primarily mammals and birds of all kinds of sizes. So today we're going to focus on talking about skeletons and the life of a skeletonized specimen at the museum. So I'm just going to start off again, a warning that there are going to be remains of animals, but we're going to have a lot of fun today. So I'm just going to flip my camera around and show you a few of the things that we have in the dermestarium and take you through that whole process. So I'll just flip around. All right, so we're going to start off with these study specimens. And if you're thinking that does not look like a skeleton, you are right. But at some point, these study specimens did have skeletons. So right now, the only parts that are skeleton is the skull right here, the legs up to the knees, and then the wings up to the elbows. The rest of this study specimen is filled with cotton, and it has a wooden dowel going up down the middle to keep it straight. So the rest of the skeleton has been taken out. Some of the muscle has been removed, and it's been taken to the dermestarium to process. So if I just walk over a little, we're here, we're at the dermestarium. So once we get the skeleton out of the specimen, it lands here in these racks. So the reason why we have these racks is because we want to dry out all of our specimens, like this little skull, before it goes into our flesh-eating beetles. And you can tell the difference between something that was a little more fresh, so these were done in the last couple days, versus things that have been sitting around for a while and have been really well dried. The reason why we don't want anything wet going into the beetles is because we don't want any kind of fungus to start growing in there. Having fungus in the colonies can actually collapse our colonies and kill all of our beetles. So we want to really make sure to not have any kind of fungus in there. So here's just some examples. We have just skulls. We have full bodies of these little birds. We have some raptors, like this raptor right here, a great horned owl back here. And then we also have some bigger stuff. So we have a full juvenile deer down here. We have some bits of kudu, some seal, a whole turtle. So we get some really cool stuff coming through here, and we can process animals of any size up to an elephant. We haven't done whales yet. Whales are not native to Colorado, in case you didn't know. And the zoo does not have any whales either. So we are, they're hard to find around these parts, but we get all kinds of other specimens. So once they're done drying in the racks, then that's when they go into our flesh-eating beetles. And I'll just walk you through to our containers. So we have a container here. We're actually working on some social media. We're doing a time lapse of this fox skeleton. So keep an eye out on that on social media. You might be able to see that soon. But here I have an open colony. I just sprayed them down with water, so they're really, really happy. But you can see all the different sizes. We have some little itty bitty things in here, some tiny little birds. And then we have this big pelican wing in here. We have some cheetah parts in here. You have a whole flamingo body in here. So these, as you can see, with especially with the small ones, the bugs can get really into the teeny tiny details of the bones, way better than what I could do with my hands. So that's why we really need the bugs. The alternative to using these flesh-eating beetles is using chemicals or using or boiling, but that tends to make the bones really brittle, and it's not great for storing long term. We want our bones to stay in our collections for hundreds and hundreds of years for future scientists to use. And we can take a closer look at these beetles. They're very happy right now. This was a very fatty cheetah, and they love to eat the fatty bits off of specimens. So there's two different types. If I can just grab the bugs. There's two different types of bugs. You can see that there's a little fuzzy one. That's the larva. So the larva will grow and grow and grow until it pupates. There he goes. Until it pupates. And then it turns into this type of beetle. So the ones that have the hard shells, those are the adults. And they don't do a whole lot of the eating for cleaning the bones. That's mostly the larvae. Since they're growing so rapidly, they need a ton of food. And luckily, we can provide them with a ton of food. The adults will eat some of the flesh off of the bones, but for the most part, they're just kind of hanging around, having a good time, drinking their water, and they're breeding continuously to keep the population alive. And we've had this colony for decades now. So I believe it started in 1989, and it's been running ever since then. So my methods of keeping the colony alive by feeding them, by giving them water every few days is a lot easier because we have an established colony versus if you're trying to start up a brand new colony, there might be some extra things that you need to do, like find a substrate where the larva can pupate because they can't just pupate on the bone. They need to burrow into somewhere and get nice and secluded and warm, and then that's when they pupate. So it's a little different than if you're starting off a colony, which you can do. They do sell dermested colony kits online. You are happy to have you do that if you so wish. But yeah, just make sure you feed them and you water them every so often, but they're neat little bugs. So this is one of our larger colonies. If I move back a little, you can see that it is in a bathtub. It's a tub within a tub, but it's pretty big, like my hand for comparison. Pretty big tub. But we also have some smaller tubs over here. So they're just like fish tanks, and they have, you can see some of the work in progress there. There's a raptor with its eyes sticking out. And you're probably wondering, why is there so much paper in there? The reason why we use paper is one, it can saturate in some water. So we want to keep the area humid. Colorado is very, very dry. So luckily we don't have a lot of problems with mold growing inside of the colonies because it is a very humid environment anyway. But we do have problems with keeping the moisture at a high enough level that the beetles are happy. So I do have to come in and wet this paper every so often, every few days, just to keep them happy, keep them hydrated, just as you should be on your everyday, right? Everyone needs water, so do the bugs. But they're working on this colony right now. And then we have some really tiny ones. This is one that I usually take out to show like guests and show school kids if they're interested in learning about beetles. And you can see I have a treat. This is probably one of the smaller things that the bugs can get through, but this is a shrew. So shrews can, they only live for about a year and a half. Think about them as the hummingbirds of the mammal world. They're super, super tiny. They weigh anywhere from 2 to 4 grams total. And lucky for us, the bugs are gentle enough that they can eat away at the tissues on the shrews but they won't eat through the bone. So unless they're absolutely starving, which we never get them to that point here, they will not eat through bone, but they're great at chewing through muscle, tendons, ligaments, and all those other parts of the specimens that we don't really need anymore. We're just looking for preserving the skeletons. So once our specimens are inside of the bugs and they're out and they're clean, so something maybe like this skull here will get taken out maybe in a day or two. It looks about ready. Then it gets pest mitigated. So as you can imagine, having all of these bugs that eat flesh would not be great inside of the collections. So when we have collections, we're thinking of preserving like those skins I showed you earlier. If we let dermestids at those skins will be gone in about a week. They will absolutely eat through everything. So we need to make sure that these bugs are not on the specimens when we take them down to the collections. So we have a double freezing process to do that. So the first time we do that is when we're taking the bugs out of these colonies. So I'll show you the freezer that we use, very high tech. I think this freezer is like 40 years old or something. You can see these are all of the bones that are ready to get washed in a couple weeks. So they're all done. The beetles have eaten through all the muscle, all the tendons, all the remaining organ tissue. And they just hang out in here for a couple weeks to make sure that all the beetles that are still on the specimens are not alive anymore. So once we get through that, then we have to wash. So very high-tech process, I know, but we use Dawn dish soap and we use some water. And here you can see there's a little skull in there. I'm going to show you how easy it is to wash something like this. So what I'm going to do is I have my sieve. We're just going to get that out. You can see that there's some little bugs still on there. I'm just going to take those out of there like that. And then you just rinse it off. Get all these bugs off. And there you go. That is a washed skull. So now that I made that look very easy, of course, if you have something that has a lot of bones like the one next to it, that will take a lot longer to sift through everything because we want to make sure that all the bones are with the specimen, that we're not missing anything. But once that's taken out and that's washed, then we just let it dry for a couple weeks, again, another couple weeks, until it's all dried up. And then once that's done, we'll throw it into a little vial. So you can see there's a little skull in there, or a little box with another little skull. And then after I have a few that are boxed and in the vials, then we can throw it into another freezer. And luckily we have our pest mitigation lab. So we have a big freezer that's at -15 Fahrenheit, where we will, again, throw the skeletons in there, all boxed up for a couple weeks. Then it goes down to the collections to fully get installed. And that's pretty much the whole life of a specimen. After the installation process, all that's left is someone to request it for research and to want to look at it for their research purposes. And then we can find it. You can see that there's some special numbers on each one of our specimens. So that way we know who it is, what parts belong to what. This number connects all of the parts of this individual with each other. So if we happen to have a skin that goes with this skull, then they can sit together in the collection. But yeah, so these will live on for as long as we can possibly hold them as research specimens. And yeah, that's the whole life of a skeleton. Yeah, any questions?
That is so incredibly interesting. I have to say, not all of us get to wash skulls at our jobs, so
Right.
I'm pretty jealous of that. We actually already do have a question coming in from the comments on Facebook, and if you out there have questions for Andie, our expert here, you can post those in the comments. We'll try to answer as many of those questions as we can. And this question is, what is the genus and species of the beetles that we use in the dermestarium?
That's a great question. So the genus and species we use is Dermestis maculatus. It is a species that is found actually here in Colorado, specifically out in the plains. So they're very, very good at eating through the tissues of specimens that are found in that area and around this Denver metro area. What they're not great at is ocean animals. Because in the ocean, in the coastline, you don't have a whole lot of bugs doing the cleanup work. You have crabs and other little crustaceans like that. So they're just not used to it. That usually takes a little bit longer for them to process.
That's so interesting. I suppose the advantage of using a local species would be that we don't have to give them special conditions in order to help them survive.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
And then, of course, they're from the plains. That makes me think of those famous images from the old West where people would find the bison skeletons on the plains. I suppose our little friends are helping with that too.
They are, yeah. I mean, if you find something dead on the road, of course, be careful. But but if you do see some little bugs, some little beetles, they're probably a type of domestic beetle. If not the exact species that we have here, there are like hundreds, thousands of species of domestic beetle around the world.
I mean, somebody's got to clean up the mess, right?
Of course, yeah.
But somebody's got to do it.
Someone's got to do it.
We've got another question here. Do you take any special precautions when you leave the dermestarium to make sure that the beetles do not escape into the greater museum?
Oh, that's a great question. So I can actually go around and show you some of our extra precautions. Let me just flip the camera again. All right, so this is our closed container. For our larger ones, you can see that we have some clips here clamping everything down. We have these paper holders that also clamp things down. So this is very secure. These little ones, I feel like these are pretty secure too. The lid is very well suctioned. So these are also very secure. And then we have a pest mitigation team over at the museum. So they monitor all of the bugs and the creepy crawlies around the museum to make sure that we don't have anything walking around that is not supposed to. So as you can see in there, no dermestids have gotten out and gotten stuck in those traps. We have a little step because although they have slightly sticky feet, you know, they're insects, they like to climb. They can't really climb metal. They're not very good at climbing metal. So we have a little step to make sure that they're not escaping. And we have, do we have more traps? We have more traps all around the museum. And I can just, we have them in different rooms too. So that way, if there's any kind of outbreak, we know about it and we're catching them. It would be really bad if they went all around the museum trying to eat through everything. And then again, the freezing stuff is really, really helpful as well.
Right. You had talked about how that process takes several weeks.
Yes.
So you're definitely making sure that not a single dermestid gets out of there.
Right. And there's a lot of science behind that. You know, there's been a lot of research going on about what temperature and for how long is the ideal temperature for keeping dermestids off of either new acquisitions or specimens that are coming down to collections.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, we've got some more questions for you from comments here. We have somebody who wants to know, what is the oldest skeleton in the animal collection and exposed to toxic preservatives from older specimens? Because you had mentioned that this was dating back to the 80s, but I'm sure we have older specimens there.
Right. So I don't know what the oldest skeleton is. It has to be from the 1800s. That's what some of our oldest specimens in general come from. But preservatives, there's a lot of different methods that people have used in the past. Using dermestids in museums has actually been used since the 20s, since the 1920s. It's the 20s now, I keep forgetting. So since the 1920s. So it was actually started as like forensic science in that field. And then the museum scientists saw that and said like, oh, that's a really good idea. Maybe we should use that. So it's been used for a very long time. In museums that don't use dermestids, they can use enzymes and heat. So usually just a hot plate, some water, and enzymes. And that can be biz, like a cleaner, borax. But that's, again, not recommended for the most part, especially for museums that want to preserve things for hundreds and hundreds of years. Another method that we have, and I can walk you to that, we do use cold water maceration sometimes if the bugs just really aren't feeling a specific specimen. And I can show you the cold water maceration pot that we have. Cold water maceration is basically you leave some stagnant, gross water for about a year. No preservatives, no nothing. It's just the bacteria that's in the air get in the water and they start eating away at the tissues. The only downside to that is that they are not very good at eating through fat. So you still have to clean up the fat afterwards. So here I will show you what is inside our cold water maceration pot right now. There it is. It looks delicious. But that's been sitting in there for a little over a year. Just flip it back. A little over a year. It's as stinky as you think it would be.
I was just about to say, I bet it smells wonderful.
Oh yeah. The good thing is that with all the stuff that I smell in here, I'm pretty used to all the nasty smells, so it's all good.
Okay, well that's good. I know at the beginning of the program you showed us some things that were up next on the menu. We have some folks wondering what have the chefs prepared for the dermestids coming up here soon?
Yeah, so we have been doing, I'll flip the camera again so I can show you. We've been pushing on some lots and lots of small birds. So all of these here are a lot of little small bird bodies. So a lot of these are from our Teen Science Scholar program that went on this summer. They were working on skeletonizing and preserving a wing for some birds that were collected around 2009, 2008. So they're quite older now, over 10 years old. And they did a great job. So a lot of these little birds to go. I think that's what's up next. And then also one of these big things is going to go in. I don't know what yet. I think this deer is going to be the next one to go in because it's about time. It's been sitting here for a little while. But yeah, I like that question.
Those pampered dermestids get to eat things none of us would ever have a chance to eat.
They're so pampered, absolutely.
I have a question for you. This is a question coming from me. Mm-hmm. What has been, in your opinion, the most unusual thing you've put into the dermestarium?
I think the most unusual thing was actually a domesticated animal. So usually we do not keep domesticated animals as pets, but we got a request from a volunteer. And no, we do not accept these requests from the public, but because she specifically worked with the domestic beetles for years, we agreed to put her domestic cat into the beetles. And now she has the whole skeleton for her cat, or of her cat.
Sciencey people, they have unusual requests sometimes.
There are a lot of unusual requests, yes.
I imagine. What's the largest thing you've put into the dermestarium?
Me personally, a whole giraffe. We put a whole giraffe into the dermestarium one time. Not in these colonies in here. We have a much larger colony in the main part of the lab. But our lab is fitted to, our largest colony is fitted for an elephant skull size. So we can do up to an Asian elephant. African elephant, I don't think so. I'm not sure. But I don't think we're going to get an African elephant anytime soon. So I don't think we have to test it out.
Still, that's got to be pretty substantial, an entire giraffe. Did it take a long time for the dermestids to clean that skeleton?
It sure does. It took a few months. Some parts took over a year. So it's just like if you were eating the same thing over and over and over again, you get really tired of it, right? So it's the same thing with the dermestids. If you give them a whole giraffe, at some point they're going to get really sick of giraffe. And the colony will start getting very, very slow and tired because they don't want to eat it. So in that case, our method is we re-soak the bones and then throw them back into the dermestids just to give it a little bit of flavor, a little bit of spice.
A little flavor goes a long way.
Yeah. We also encourage with bacon grease. We save some bacon grease when we do our own cooking at home because they do love bacon grease.
I mean, I love bacon grease, so I can identify with those dermestids. So we've got 2 questions coming in from the chat here, and do we know where did these colonies originate from?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually don't know. These colonies started before I was born, so and before anyone here started working here. So I don't think anyone really knows where it actually started. But that's a very good question. I got to do some investigations.
That is a good question. And then so for zoological specimens, these are animals that have died recently. We have a question here. Were any of these beetles used on any of the mastodon or mammoth bones that we found in snowmass?
That's a good question. So they have not. So we in zoology work on mostly extant animals. So the opposite of extinct. Extinct means that it's no longer alive. Extant means that the species is still alive and around today. Although we do have some extinct specimens in our collections, think like passenger pigeons, Carolina parakeets, things like that. We don't work on specimens that are incredibly old, like mammoths, and at that kind of like edge of fossilization, but kind of maybe not really. It's a little bit of a blurry line for typically like the public, because you look at a mastodon, you look at an elephant, and you're like, oh, it's the same thing, but it actually is a completely different discipline. So the beetles did not get to eat any kind of mastodon or anything like that.
I'd imagine too, a lot of those specimens were tens of thousands of years old. You talked about how they're picky about eating an entire giraffe. I imagine if there even was flesh left on those bones, it probably wouldn't be very fresh. So I doubt the dermestids would. But there could have been dermestids tens of thousands of years ago that had cleaned before they got there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, at any point in history, you needed something to dispose of the garbage, so to say. Right? And dermestid beetles are not the only ones that are like the trash people of the world, the natural world. We also have things like vultures that eat carrion, we have crows, and then later on in that decomposition stage, that's where you get the dermestid beetles, and then you get fungi and all kinds of really fun critters.
Well, we're just about out of time for our program here. We've had some excellent questions. I've learned a lot. I really appreciate your time, Andie. I have one final question for you.
Yes.
You had mentioned before we started broadcasting that you often get asked what's the largest thing that gets put into the dermestarium. But I want to know, what is the smallest thing that you've ever processed?
It was a baby hummingbird that was 1.5 grams. Super tiny. We needed to make a whole special contraption just so the bugs wouldn't completely tear through it.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, you said that it took the giraffe several months to be cleaned. How long did it take this baby hummingbird?
It took a couple hours.
Well, there you have it. Things you never thought you would learn, but here we are. This was fascinating. Thank you so much, Andie. I appreciate it. And
Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's our pleasure. It's our pleasure to share some of the wonderful work that we do here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science that happens behind the scenes. With you wonderful folks out there, we want to say thank you so much for joining us today for Science Division Live. Thank you for your wonderful questions. And we hope you all have an excellent rest of your day. Goodbye, everybody. Bye-bye.